Hello, Kirsten. You're so very welcome. Thank you for joining us here at the Empathic Leadership Summit. I feel so honored to have you with us. Thank you so much. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And it's great to be here with you and all the other speakers. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So why don't you introduce yourself first off? Tell us a bit about your background.
I'm Kirsten Beske. I'm located in the US on the East Coast in Vermont, and I'm a life redesign coach. And I made that up because
Good name. I like
it's because of what I do, obviously. But my story is that I was an attorney. I was a partner at a law firm doing litigation work where you fight with people constantly. And I did that for 14 years, and I really loved it for the first 10, I'd say. And then I had my children, and for some people know my story, but each of my children had some significant health issues. My first had open heart surgery at 3 weeks to take a tumor out. They're fine. And my son was born right after 9/11, very premature. I had a
Mm.
close friend die in one of the towers of the World Trade
Oh,
Center. I
wow.
was trying to get to his funeral. Instead, I had my poor baby, 1 pound, 11 ounces, 3 months early, and, barely surviving. He's great today,
Incredible.
turning 23 in 2 days.
Oh,
So we're doing
fantastic.
great. However, it really sent me into a kind of existential spin. What is the purpose of life? Why are we bringing life into the world when the world is so crazy, which we
Yeah,
can
wow.
say again today, right?
Yeah.
And all that kind of crisis led me to rethink what I was doing because I was working for big companies doing, fighting for like a few $1,000s on behalf of a company. So I went myself to a coach and I reevaluated all my priorities and my interests. Ended up going back to school to get a master's in psychology because I had never been to get help from any human ever in my life. I found during my crisis when I finally got to a very wise doctor who helped me, that, oh, you can help people just by talking to them and having them frame things up. So I went into the field of psychology and became a psychotherapist and spent over a decade with a private practice helping people.
Right.
And in the course of that, I got very interested in the field of positive psychology, which is kind of how we thrive, even if we don't have a mental illness or whatever that we're working with. So my coaching career became working with people trying to apply the theories of positive psychology to our lives so we can all really thrive. And so what I do today, and I've been doing for the last 5+ years now, is I work with mid-career women who are looking for a little more engagement and passion, and they know they have a next chapter, but they don't know what exactly it's going to look like. So I help them work through the process of reorganizing all the pieces of their lives and their experience and what they want so that they can really design the next chapter and have a great next, with they're not the final chapter, but a
Yeah,
really
okay.
wonderful, thriving next chapter of life.
Wow, amazing. What a story and what varied experience you have. So what was your experience of empathic leadership across all of those years
Oh, it was so
or
different.
careers?
Yeah.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I was an attorney, I worked for large law firms, and with a lot of, and I'm not disparaging the whole gender, but a lot of men. And a lot of lawyers don't have high empathy. I'll say that as a, back then, that was a long time ago.
Right.
um, and so I think of empathy as kind of like the awareness of other people's thoughts and feelings. Like, you have that knowingness and then acting compassionately in light of what you know, and not manipulating it, right? And using that knowledge and that empathy wisely to, lift up others and lead them properly. So, use the power for good. So I didn't find a lot of empathy in the law field at all.
Okay.
Now, when I moved into the psychology field, I actually had like life altering experiences with really empathic leaders. And I remember the first time I really screwed something up as an intern, and I was deathly afraid of what was going to happen. I messed up some paperwork, and it was like she's like, "Well, yes, you did that wrong. Now go back and redo it, and let me know when it's done." And I was like, that's it. And that almost made me cry. I never had just like a really compassionate kind of
And it's so
correction like that.
simple. I suppose
So
your expectations from your previous career would have been what that she would give out to you, or, you know.
Yeah, yeah, there'd be a scolding and a
Yeah.
punishment and a not understanding. So anyway, and I just over and over have experienced, very empathic leaders, and I've really appreciated it because I know the contrasts.
Yeah.
And it also helped inform my parenting skills, because, I am an empath, and my parents were not, um, neither
Okay.
one of them. And so it was really a gift I felt I was giving my kids to be able to reflect back to them that I understood what their feeling or thought was, even if we weren't going to do what they were asking that we were going to
Yes,
do.
yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm just reflecting as a parent as well. Like we do bring empathic leadership into our homes all the time, don't we?
Mhm, we
It's so
sure do.
important.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
show them a lot through empathy. Okay, fantastic. So today's topic is really, really interesting. The upside of ADHD at work. So maybe you could speak generally about neurodiversity, firstly, and then maybe a bit more specifically about ADHD, what it is, and how would people know if they have it?
Absolutely. Well, and I'll say that, I had many family members that have ADHD diagnosis, but it
Okay.
wasn't until the last 2 years or so that I actually realized the label could apply to myself. So
Right. Right.
I'm one of
Well,
the people who went through life, probably with a neurodiverse brain, but I was able to cope with it and modify my life in such a way that it didn't become a problem enough that
mhm.
I needed intervention. But now I'm like, oh, so many. I looked up the statistics, and women get diagnosed with ADHD at half the rate of men, girls and boys.
Yeah,
And also, when you're of a certain age, we didn't have such a knowledge of what neurodiversity is generally,
of
and so we
course,
weren't
back.
looking to diagnose people.
Yeah.
But I'm sure most people know what neurodiversity is, but just for the purposes of this, it's when your brain is essentially wired differently. And it's not an illness, it's not anything wrong with you. It's just that your brain is wired in a certain pattern that the neurotypical people don't have. And so this can mean that there's different ways that you interact with the world, that are completely legitimate. But if you don't understand that your framework and your wiring is different, you might start to wonder what's wrong with you, or other people might not see you in the right way. So it's a really nice frame to put around yourself if you do have a label that fits, because it can explain so many things that you just experience on a day-to-day basis, but you don't understand why. You're like, is it me? Am I weird?
Mhm.
Why am I not fitting in right? And so the nice thing is we have a lot more explanation for a lot of different neurodivergent things today, from the what we call now being on the spectrum, which we used to only talk about Asperger's, but it's just like the autism spectrum is broad. A lot of people are on it, but here ADHD, a different diagnosis, is just a really nice way to explain the way people think slightly differently because of their wiring.
Okay,
And,
fantastic. Like
yeah.
I'm so intrigued by the kind of the increase of knowledge that we have, of course, over the past couple of decades, but also the increase of that kind of recognition, and the inclusion of the fact that diversity is a beautiful thing. And the fact
Mhm,
that some people think differently is a beautiful thing, and that feeds
mhm.
into empathy in the workplace and empathic leadership. And I think from my point of view in particular, being highly sensitive, being an empath, is also being neurodivergent, because my brain is wired differently to a lot of people, so it's kind of like, it's interesting how we have diagnoses and we have labels, but really it's not about the labels, is it?
Not at all. And just like you were saying, there is some overlap, between what an empath and highly sensitive person, how they experience the world, and an ADHD wired brain experience the
Sure.
world. One doesn't necessarily mean the other, but you could be both.
Yeah.
And again, I've always loved this idea of self-knowledge is power. And when you get the right frame to put around something, it just helps you understand it in a different context that just makes it manageable, right? Just
Totally.
like,
Yes.
oh, that makes sense. So
Oh,
so
I
it doesn't
understand that. Okay, I have insight and knowledge to apply to the situation. Indeed. Yeah.
exactly. So for those people, who may be watching this who don't know about ADHD, there's the the stereotypical things, there's usually two types of ADHD, either inattention, which is like trouble focusing, easily distracted, all, organizational difficulties, those type of things. Or in that same kind of category, there's they call it hyper focus, where you have this superpower where you can just zone in and focus for hours on end on something that interests you. And you can have both of those. Or there's that hyperactivity piece, which is that like need to move and feel restless and maybe interrupt others, or, rush through things or be impulsive. And so there's like so many different ways all of those things can combine also. So there's no easy label to put on it. But, the idea that, for example, I cannot bear to sit through long meetings. I would rather pull my teeth out than sit through a long, boring meeting. So over the years, I've had to develop some strategies, to make myself figure out how to manage that. So I clearly have a bit of the hyperactivity in my, wiring. But everyone's different. And so what we've found is that if you kind of get that idea of, this is my wiring, these are the things that are hard for me, then you get the opportunity to decide, do I want to change that? Is it interfering with my life in any way? And then how do I want to work with it? But there's huge upside to having an ADHD wired brain. So I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that.
Please do. Yeah, great.
Yeah, so one of the things that is really across the board kind of true about people who have the wiring of an ADHD mind is that they have often immense creativity, and they really can think out of the box, and they can, just like a lot of founders, innovators, designers have an ADHD brain. And I remember reading about the CEO of JetBlue, I believe, is a ADHD wired person. And, he just, made this whole company and did all these things. And I might have the wrong company. Now I'm thinking, Virgin Atlantic. But, but he couldn't, do a simplest task of getting on the phone to get someone to cut down a tree that fell in his backyard. So the question is, you can have this superpower of broad thinking, grand ideas, creative ideas, and then also need some support on your daily tasks. So if at work you have that ability to be creative and think large and big, you're going to be more engaged, especially if it's something that you're interested in. So there's that superpower of the creative thinking. There's also this ability to think on the spot. And I always wonder if this is the initial wiring or what you've learned because you've had to. I once had a coworker who had an ADHD diagnosis, and he was so great at pivoting on the spot. And he used to do group trainings where he'd bring all these kind of toys and equipment and outdoor stuff and do these corporate trainings. And one day he forgot his equipment, and he got on site and he called his boss very in a panic. And he's like, I forgot everything. And the boss is like, you must have something. And he's like, yeah, I have a quarter. And the boss said, make it work. And he did. He said he spent a whole day with using different exercises with the 1 quarter, and everyone loved it, and it went really well. So when you're forced to pivot because maybe you might be a little more scattered or distracted, or for whatever reason you don't always have all the ducks in a row, then you have this fantastic ability to improv and think fast and be agile on your feet. And that's a skill you can use anytime, not just in an emergency, right?
Right. So, that's when it's like the creativity kicks in then or something, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So having the wiring to be able to rapidly put all things together and kind of grab concepts from different areas and put them together, synthesize them, and do it all in a split second is one of the superpowers also of having a neurodivergent brain that way.
Fantastic. And I love the way that your story shows how empathic leadership actually facilitated that, because his boss could have been, given out to him or told him to quit it, or, you know, there could have been a certain expectation of him. Without that fluidity, he wouldn't have been able to thrive as he did. You know, and I think that's
Exactly.
the key point, that empathic leadership and people like ourselves who are maybe highly sensitive, highly empathic, we can actually facilitate the neurodivergent environment quite readily, quite naturally.
Exactly. And so that's why, I'd like to, when I work with my clients, if they're in a job situation, and we can talk about leadership in a more corporate situation or business style thing where there's someone above you or a peer. And those leaders have to be, it's really lovely when they're empathic and understand maybe that you have certain strengths and certain not strengths,
Yeah.
and divide work accordingly. But also when you're self-employed, and when you're trying to maybe outsource some work or delegate, to really be clear on, well, these are the things that I know I'm good at because they are my superpower, and these are the things I'm very bad at, and I really need help with. And so I know for me, detail work is very difficult, and I will misspell things and I will transpose things, and for me to have a proofreader or someone that's overlooking my work is vital to me,
Right.
looking like a literate person who actually attended Harvard University like I did. um,
Right.
um, thank goodness I arrived at university at the time that personal computers became available, because spell check was very important to me as I went through all my education.
Right.
And I had really wonderful assistants over the years, especially when I was an attorney, who I could get the brief done and I could get all the legal concepts written, but they had to go through and make sure that I had the punctuation and the spelling correct, and keep track of the court dates, when the due dates were with the court for the different things. And that was a great team, right? That was a
Right.
perfect team working setup. So
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So having the support of you know, a detail orientated person beside you can transform how your strengths then can come to the fore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah. Okay. Amazing.
and
And
let's
what other
not be.
ways?
Go
Sorry.
ahead, go ahead.
No, you
Well,
go
no,
ahead.
I was just going to say, and to be compassionate to yourself about it, right?
Right.
To
Okay.
not think, oh, this is like a weakness I have. It's more thinking, changing that narrative and being, I have strengths. How do I maximize them?
Yeah.
And we don't, if we spend time working on our weaknesses, sometimes that's just grinding away, wasting our energy. It's not going to change because it's wiring. It's not just bad habits.
Yeah.
And certainly there's always room for a little improvement, but the more important thing is to not spend all that energy trying to do things that deplete you, that you're not good at, and to really try to lean into those things that you are good at, that you love to do, that you're interested in. And those are the ones you'll be able to keep your focus better with.
Okay, okay, fantastic. That's amazing advice for anyone watching. You know, maximizing those strengths. And what about if someone wants to change their job or make a career pivot of some sort or launch a business, you know, and they have ADHD and they're wired that way. You know, what are your tips for those people? What should they think about?
Well, I think the first thing is to realize sometimes the cues and the clues that you might need a job change come out because of your wiring. Because when you're kind of bored or uninspired or not challenged, those are always, then you start to feel a certain way. And you might not understand that an ADHD brain needs a pretty high level of stimulation
Mm.
to feel good and engaged. So that's a clue that, if I'm feeling really kind of bored is one thing, but also just like that tedium, that, like the day after day of the same thing, an ADHD brain needs variety. And if you're not getting it at work, either you need to check in with I call it job crafting. Can you shift your job around enough that you can get some of that stimulation again? Or it might be time to look for something different. And so that's the knowing yourself part, that you want to make sure that you understand that you deserve to be engaged and interested in what you're doing just as much as the next person. And you might need a little higher level of that interest and stimulation to do your best work. So figure out a way to get it. Either change your job inside its current parameters, or maybe find a whole nother one that meets that better. That's
Okay.
one thing, among others. As we already talked about, there's that idea, can you get the support you need? Because if you have an empathic boss and they understand that you're super valuable in a lot of ways, but you might need a little extra support around deadlines or like the procrastination tendency that sometimes ADHD brains are, oddly enough, ADHD brains can be a bit perfectionist, which seems contradictory, but it's true, and that often that perfectionism is what's stopping some ADHD brain from getting started on things, because they're thinking so far ahead to the end product, they're forgetting that you can break it down into little tiny chunks that you can just work on one at a time. You don't have to get it perfect in the first shot.
This is kind of where the overlap comes into play, because I've worked with a lot of HSPs, highly sensitive people, highly empathic people, and they would be the same. They kind of join the dots so readily that they're going way ahead and they have to wait for everybody else to kind of catch up. And I think that overlap is what they refer to as a sensory profile. Am I right in saying that?
That
Because
sounds right.
as highly sensitives, so if you have an ADHD wired brain, I love the way you describe it that way, actually, that's brilliant. And you're perhaps bored at work, or you're not feeling that sense of satisfaction, so you need more stimulation. But if you're highly sensitive as well, then you need to be careful not to overdo it to the point of overwhelm. And so it's understanding your own needs, your own sensory profile, isn't it?
Absolutely. And when we talk about stimulation, think about that. It doesn't, if you're in a area with a lot of distraction, like those cubicles, you're not going to do your best work. So you might need accommodation with some headphones, or even I work here in my home office, but I even put noise reducing headphones in so I could focus on writing, right? Even though maybe nothing else is happening in the house, right? But overstimulation for HSP can be distracting to an ADHD wired brain, yet stimulation in the sense of being interested what you're doing is a different kind of stimulation I think an HSP can handle. Right. So there's that overstimulation from a sensory perspective, but it's stimulation of your interest in your brain. I think is different for both categories.
Okay,
and that's a good kind of stimulation, right? To be interested and engaged in what you're doing is the right kind of stimulation.
And I always feel with these conversations that I end up saying, that we're all human at the end of the day. So a human who's not interested in what they're doing will ultimately not be so happy anyway. You know what I mean? And
so
then it's
true.
all the nuance that goes then with your own profile, your own individualism. But it's a human thing. If you're not interested in the thing in front of you, it's not going to retain your attention for very long.
No, and it just maybe the thresholds may be different for that, what that takes. But absolutely, and that's the same for a couple of the other things that HSPs and ADHD wired brains have, is that idea that you may start to get burnout if the environment is not correct for your wiring. And so if you are a person that is tasked to do a lot of detail work on the job, you can probably do it, but for a sustained period of time, over time, it's going to grind you down. Just like a HSP might be able to manage environmental or noises or people that disturb them. Over time, that's going to grind you down. So there's that overlap there, but it's the personal knowledge and checking in with yourself. How does this feel for me? If it doesn't feel good, the odd thing is, since we're usually wired on these to have these profiles, it feels familiar. But just because it feels familiar doesn't mean it's good for us.
Okay.
And so really checking in, is my energy getting depleted by this thing? Can I change it? So I love, I always start my work with my clients around like a little self-assessment again, like where am I at this point in my life? And what have I learned about myself? And what do I know now that I might not have known 20 years ago? And how do I make decisions that are more wise and based on what I my increased knowledge of myself at this particular point in my life? Because then you can make those good decisions going forward. And just because I've always said, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you have to keep doing it.
That's my
Yes,
favorite line.
exactly. Exactly, because you might be pleasing everybody else around you because you're so good at it, but if
Right.
it's not aligned with you and you're not motivated to do it, then it's a path to burnout. Totally agree with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, fantastic, Kirsten. You've taught us an awful lot today. Thank you so, so much. Is there anything you'd like to share with our attendees, or let us know where they can find more about your work?
Absolutely. Well, I have shared a freebie with all of you.
Great.
It's my life rebalance map exercise. And so it's something you can do in the privacy of your, little room. And it's kind of uses a little bit of, creativity. So anyone who's high on the creativity, just
Great.
it helps you look at where you are, where you want to be, and how to get there. So, if you're interested in a little life rebalance, I recommend trying that exercise. And then,
Brilliant.
of course, I run programs for not just ADHD people. It just turns out that a lot of my clients do happen to often hit that profile. I was surprised to find. I'd say, quarter to a third of them are. But it's like you said, we're humans and we all want to be engaged in life and not burn out. And so I have a website, it's my name, KirstenBeske.com, where you can read about my Next Spark Accelerator program, where I work with women and we, move you through the journey of transforming your life without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know if you have that expression over there, but
And we do indeed, yes.
we don't have to completely reinvent ourselves. We've earned everything we've
Yes.
earned up to this point, but we do get to reorganize it in a way that works best for us. So that's what I work with my clients.
Fantastic. I always say it's like, you've had the same cake for a long time. You just want to pull apart the ingredients and maybe bake a new cake. That's how
I love
tend
that.
to.
I love that. Yeah.
So we're definitely on the same page.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and energy today, Kirsten. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. See you again. Bye-bye.
We'll see you.